Morning, holy Yidden. Welcome. Today is July 6th. Tammuz 7. We're studying the entire Talmud on page, one line at a time. Yeah, I'm utterly in denial about how the calendars move so far along. We're here to study the entire Talmud on page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechah Shabbos, the 17th chapter, Kuf Chav Daled. And today we're going to dive into a new Mishnah that we started at the close of yesterday's discussion. The Mishnah discusses the status, the permissibility of handling broken kalim, broken things. This is a highly relatable thing because in reality, stuff breaks all the time. And so even if, part of living is that sometimes things break. It's inescapable, just like we have kalim that we use. It's unavoidable that sometimes something might break. I don't know if anyone here has a smartphone, but the screens are very prone to breaking. And there's a store right over the bridge west of Hallandale Beach Boulevard called Apple ER. And they are an incredibly successful business because people are constantly replacing their screens. I've even been there a number of times. So maybe the kalim we're going to talk about today are a little different than an iPhone, but the idea of something breaking, relatable. The idea that something that breaks may or may not still be able to be used for its original use. And more specifically, the broken off piece of a broken item may or may not be useful. Of course, we are going to run into some tension between our modern standards of what is useful and what is disposed of, which is contrasted with a value of recycling, where we value the reuse even of something that no longer has its original function. And let's see how all of these ideas play in to our
Rabbi
discussion. Yes, Rabbi.
Would a part of an item come under the rules of a broken keli?
So this is exactly what we're going to be discussing, among other subjects, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. When can't it be reused? Are there things you could do to cause it to once again be muksa or not? Is it considered a kli or not? So that and so much more is what we'll be discussing right now. Welcome, Dr. Pasternak. All right, let's share the screen. In a way, I was thinking about it. We have a lot of this, not that everyone uses it, but there's plenty of availability today of disposable paperware and cutlery. And so ironically, I think in a way, if you drop a styrofoam bowl, it's even less likely to break than a permanent bowl. So maybe we're doing something wrong. The things that crack easily should be disposable, and the things that have a greater degree of permanence should be marketed as the unbreakable. So we'll have to talk to the management. All right, here is our Mishnah. Again, we read this yesterday. We'll read through it again, but we'll go through it fast, and then we will start our Gemara's analysis of the Mishnah. If a keli is allowed to be handled on Shabbos, in our language, a keli that's not muksa. So any circumstance where you're allowed to use a vessel, shivreyem nitolim imahem, a piece that breaks off would be classified similarly, meaning the broken part would maintain the classification of the original broken keli. Ubilvad, there is a condition. It's not a blanket license. It must be able to be used for some kind of useful use or purpose. Rashi, what is shum melacha? Or rather, I'm sorry, what is me'ein melacha? Some kind of work. So he says shum melacha, any melacha. Even if it is not identical to its pre-shattering use. So the keli, the mother dish, obviously the original keli has one use. That's allowed to be used on Shabbos. You're allowed to handle it. The broken off shard or piece can't be used for that, but can be used for something else. Says the Tanakama, use it. Gesundheit. Obviously, we understand why this is a buildup of our previous Mishnahs, because until now we were establishing the primary keli, the tzorech, shalol tzorech, right? All the different things we discussed in the last 2-3 Mishnahs. Now we're talking about something that we've already established to be non-muksa, to be handleable. Now we want to know if it breaks. And so the first opening statement of the Mishnah, a broken piece is still not muksa. It has the status of the original keli, so long as it is useful for something. One of the questions the Gemara is going to ask here is, when did it break? Did it break on Shabbos? Did it break before Shabbos? Is there a difference? And so that's going to be one of the questions that we're going to need to figure out. Doctor?
When you say it has to be useful for something, everything is useful for something. Oh, you get back to this functional fixing this business.
Yes.
If you're creative, anything at some point will be usable for some function. So the question is, do you have to have in mind that this shard from a glass, what you're going to use it for? Or can you just say, oh, of course, I have a whole box of stuff that I put away, and I always find sometime 2 years later, maybe I could use, for that function. So that's the question.
So we're going to see, that's a very good question to keep in mind as we go through the Gemara. What does a use mean? The thing that I'll say now is that obviously its use needs to be Shabbos permitted.
Right.
But,
okay.
but yet, doctor, you're making a very important point, which is that with enough creativity, we can always come up. And listen, we know resourceful people that are very good at, putting everything to use.
Rabbi, I have a great example. People who use glass in their artwork.
Right. Okay, there you go.
But is that a keli?
I mean, is artwork a purpose?
Yeah.
It's probably not a Shabbos friendly purpose, right? Because it's probably bone neck.
So no, you're making a good point that anything has value, but would that be considered malacha? Would that be a Shabbosly permitted malacha, or is it considered any malacha? Or is it art? Meaning, if the shard is going to be used in an art piece, you have no need or use or reason to handle it on Shabbos. But but I don't want to negate what you said. That was very helpful for us to expand to break out of our functional fixedness for a moment and conceive of a more flexible way of understanding things. Dr. Hammer, I have to confess, when we started the Gemara and you mentioned this idea of functional fixedness, I did not realize how helpful it would be. And I'm almost tempted to reach out to my fellow fellow studiers of the Talmud and teachers of the Talmud. But before you even open up Masechah Shabbos, this is a Wikipedia entry you might want to read 2 or 3 times, and it'll be helpful. Anyways, so the first item of the Mishnah, again, Mein Malacha, we have a lot of questions. When did it break? What use is it actually useful for? What if you throw it in the garbage? Can you fish it out of the garbage? So those are a number of questions that we're going to be probing in a moment. Shivrei Areva. Let's get specific. Shivrei Areva, the broken piece that's broken off of a large mixing bowl, which may yet be used to cover a barrel. Just based on a simple peripheral reading, it makes me think that areva, this mixing bowl, must have been massive, and the shard is quite large too, if it's able to cover up the mouth of a barrel. So assuming that the barrel here has the dimensions of what my imagination automatically goes to when you say the word barrel, we're talking about a pretty decently sized barrel. Again, willing to be incorrect, but that's what comes to mind. I just pulled out my Steinsaltz here. I want to see if he gives us any pictures. Alas, does not appear to do so. Okay, but I'm going to keep this by in a moment because there's another comment on it. All right, so a broken bowl, one of the pieces that break off might be good for covering a barrel. Now, I do want to also point out that we're not talking about glass here right now. And so you could use earthenware. Maybe you could sand it down, or maybe not, because it's Shabbos. You can't sand it down, but you could place it on top. It doesn't look like they were worried about airtight coverings either, just based on my sense of what's going on. What about shards of glass? You can use it to cover the mouth, the top of a little jug, a little cruise. So Rabbi Steinsaltz here has an explanation on glass, which I think the comment is going to answer some of our musings here. The Gemara Yerushalmi asks, why doesn't the Gemara just say that shards of glass can be used as a knife? The most natural, when I ask you to play a game of word association and I say shard of glass, what comes to mind? 50% of the responses are going to be cut, right? And so we know that shards of glass can run very sharp. And so what use could you use with a shard of glass? Well, you can use it as a knife. So the Gemara Yerushalmi gives two answers. Number one, maybe we're talking about a shard that isn't sharp enough, and hopefully so, because otherwise it might be dangerous to handle. Number two, to be considered significant regarding carrying, okay, I don't understand the second answer. I'm going to let it stand for the moment. But anyways, the question is asked, and it's a good question, and it makes you think. Makes me think anyways. So there we have the second. Actually, let me just. All right, let's continue. I was hoping somebody else would comment on that question. So this is opinion, the first opinion, the Tanna Kama of the Mishnah. As long as there's a use, even if it's not immediate, even if it's not the same use as the original use. So let's just imagine you have a big Shabbos begins, and you have a very large bowl, a mixing bowl, massive bowl. It's useful. It's a keli that you're allowed to use on Shabbos for holding stuff, for pouring stuff, for containing food stuffs or whatever. It breaks. The shards are no longer useful to hold food. So you cannot do the same at Malacha, but you can do a different permissible use. Therefore, says the Tanna Kama, it is not muksa, you can handle it. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says no. They must be able to not only do a different malacha, they have to be able to be used for something similar to the original use. Now, the Mishnah wants to give us examples, and I think here the examples make sense to help us see how this exercise works. Shivrei Areva, you have pieces of pieces of a large bowl that broke off. The bowl in its lifetime is used lasuk l'toicha mikvah. Well, actually, no, I take that back. On the little shards, there's still enough of a it's still able to contain a mikvah. Steinsaltz says soup, we'll say soup. Rashi says it's ava, it's something that's a little thicker, similar to dough. So we're talking about a thick, I think jello might make more sense, or a cereal. Anyways, or kompot. Bishal zchuchis, and a shard of glass, lotzuk l'toichan shemen, to be able to pour into them oil. So if you have a little piece of glass that still has a bowl-like shape, it can be used to hold oil. And again, at a time where there's a shortage of kalim, you make do with what you have, and if something breaks, you don't just throw it out. You first consider if there is another use. So to summarize the Mishnah, Tanakama, any permissible use would make a shard still non-muksa, still available for use. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it must be the original purpose. Otherwise, it remains muksa. This is our Mishnah, and we read it yesterday, but now we spent a little more time delving into it. Now the Gemara begins to understand, or to attempt to understand, what the backdrop of this conversation is. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Machloikes, when does Rabbi Yehuda and the original author of the Mishnah argue? Shenishbru me'erev Shabbos, it broke before the onset of Shabbos. The Mar Savar me'ein melachton. Rabbi Yehuda says me'ein melachton, in even then. For a similar use, it is not muksa. Me'ein melach acheres loi. But for another kind of use, it is prohibited. Umar Savar, and the Tanakama says, afilu mein malach acheres, even for another use. Aval, nishbru b'Shabbos. It broke on Shabbos. Divrei hakol mutar, and maybe here Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama would all agree that it remains not muksa, it remains permissible to be handled. Why would you say that? Why would, if it happened on Shabbos? Again, this is the Gemara is going to go through this. This is not necessarily the final answer, but at this point, the Gemara says, Hayo. Hayel umuchanim al gabe avihem, being that they were muchan, they were prepared, they were available to the owner on basis of the original keli mutter. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. Being that they were designated for Shabbos use and considered prepared. Prepared is the opposite of muksa. Muksa means that it was set aside. Muchan means that it was very much in your intention to use. So because the original use that you're part of is mutter, so you're allowed to use the shard as well. Rashi says, so basically in this explanation, which is not going to be the final explanation, we say whatever the status of the keli with all of its parts was at the onset of Shabbos, maybe that would extend to the entirety of Shabbos, and maybe everybody agrees. The debate only is before Shabbos, because when Shabbos starts, the reality becomes crystallized, and you're stuck in that. The broken part has no use, or not the original use. Rabbi Yehuda would say it's usher, and the Tanakh would say mutter. Professor.
Rabbi, if it's broke on Shabbos, so they are all nolad.
Good question.
This concept kind of denies its possible use.
Well, why is it noilad? Explain. Now, you're asking a good question. It's going to come up soon, but why is it noilad?
It didn't exist before Shabbos, those pieces.
Oh, but it did.
They existed in the ball, as parts of the ball, and as parts of the ball, they weren't distinguishable one from another. But now, all of a sudden, we have several pieces with identity, and they are newly born on Shabbos.
All right. So, in very shortly, we'll bring up Naila. That's a very good question. At this point, my gut reaction would be that if we will think through the different scenarios of Nailad, which means that on Yontif, something that comes into existence that didn't exist previously is muksa. It's out of sight, out of mind, and therefore it does not become available to you. And the same would apply on Shabbos, with less applicability just because of the restrictions of Shabbos. And so the professor is asking, how can you say that something that breaks on Shabbos is mutter? On the contrary, you would say anything that breaks on Shabbos is asur because it didn't exist previously. My answer would probably be, although maybe I already said it, is that usually Noilad is entirely non-existent. And I know you're retort, but hold on for a second. Whereas here it does exist. You're using it, you're handling it. It just became a different size. It became a different shape, but it was essentially present, available, and used by you. Professor, likely your response will be an egg exists within the mother. It just didn't emerge. And so that's a fair retort. I think we could come, we if we wanted to, we could distinguish between the two. And if we wanted to, we could argue that it remains yet the same. let's keep our eyes open for clues to that point, because it's a very good question and a very well. All right. So the Tanakh, the initial attempt of understanding this machlokes, the initial presentation, which is by Shmuel, is that the whole debate is only about before Shabbos, but on Shabbos it should be mutter because it never had a chance to really change from its designation as available. That was the initial explanation. Moisiv Rav Zutra or Rav Zutroi presents a challenge. What's the challenge? It comes from a discussion about Yontif, about burning wood. Masikin b'kelim. One is permitted to use a keli as fuel for a fire on Yontif. The ein masikin b'shivrei kelim, but you are not allowed to light a fire with a broken keli. Rashi, b'yontif, you're allowed to handle a full keli and use it to as fuel. Sheharei re'oyim litaltel, because you're allowed to handle it via taltel, so you'll carry it v'yitim l'tachar, and you'll place it in the fire. I know you're going to say this is the very opposite of our value of the claim we made that kelim were so valuable that they'd even want to use a broken piece, and now we have an instance where they want to actually burn a keli because they need fuel. Fair question, but I think we have to consider the value of fuel. All right, Eli, you're going to say something?
Yes. So back in the day when it was freezing and they had no heat, what did they do for heat?
Well, they used fuel. Professor Stern has reminded us already on a few occasions, having lived in a very cold climate at a time of great poverty, the extents and the lengths people went just for a little fuel. And so we could imagine that at a time where a person needed fuel, they might even burn a whole keli. But right now, let's forget the circumstances of why, and let's just go down to the essential halachic question of, is it muksa or not? And this brisa says, whole kelim, you can carry, it's not muksa. Broken kelim, they are muksa. Rashi, ve'ein masikin b'shivrei kelim, tehavo lehu muksin. They are out of bounds for you. They're out of range. You cannot handle them. You cannot carry them. And if you can't carry them, you cannot put them into the fire, which would challenge the assertion that a broken keli should be not muksa. But the Gemara is not done. We got to clarify what's going on over here. The nishberu emas. When did the said vessel break? Ilema. The nishberu me'erev yontif. If it broke on erev yontif, eitzim ba'alma ninhu, it's like plain old wood, which plain old wood is firewood, which you should always be allowed to use, right? And so they are mukhan. They are available to burn. So it cannot be that they broke on Erev Yontif. We have to say that they broke on Yontif. When we say that you're allowed to burn only a whole keli, but not a broken keli, indicating that if something broke on Yontif, if something broke on Shabbos, it should be utterly muktzah. Rashi, we consider it to be noilad. And so, as the professor pointed out, and the Gemara with Rashi's explanation clarifies, that something that broke on Yontif seems like we treat it as noilad, we put it it's out of bounds, and then really we should revise the Mishnah to say that if it broke on Yontif, everybody agrees that it is all muksa. That's the question of Rav Zutra. I want to see one thing. No. So now we need to reimagine what Shmuel was saying. Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Machloikes Shenishbru b'Shabbos. Professor, are you here? All right. The Machloikes is if it broke on Shabbos. Mar Sover Muchanhu, Mar Sover Noiladu. The Tanna Kama says it remains available to us. Umar Sovar, no, that's the Tanna Kama. Umar Sovar Noiladu. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you cannot use it because it is Noilad. It came into existence. It's a new creation. It's a new thing, and it remains Muksa. Have a Erev Shabbos. If it broke prior to Shabbos, everybody should agree that it is mutter. Because already before Yontif or Shabbos started, we already conceived of its new use, and therefore it should be mutter. Rashi, Mar Savar Mochanhu, Kivan Deroy L'Shum Melacha. It can be used for anything. Therefore, it's Muchan. It was originally available. It never had a moment where it was not available. Okay, so the use changed, the size changed, but it is essentially present. That would be the Tanna Kama's explanation. Umar Savar Noiladu, Rabbi Yehuda says it's Noilad. Because yesterday it was a different tool. Yesterday it was a bowl, and now it is a whatever. Hilkach me'ein melachta be'inon. Therefore, for an item to break and not become muksa, it has to be me'ein melachta. This is the alternate and revised way we must understand the difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda. I hope the professor comes back soon so we can tell him that we already had his question not only considered but embraced. So there we have it. Now we're going to talk more broadly about the halachas of burning something, burning a keli on Yontif. First, let's actually do this. No. All right, let's see the Gemara. Tani Chada. We have a brisa that says like this. Masikin b'kelim, ein masikin b'shivrei kelim. You're allowed to fuel up a fire with kelim, but not scrap kelim, broken shards of kelim. Let me ask a question, a scientific question. What kind of shivrei keli is going to work as fuel? Probably not clay or pottery. True or false?
Bowl.
Doctor, I'm sorry?
I said a wooden bowl.
It's going to have to be made out of wood. Okay, yeah, that's what I'm imagining. It's just interesting because I don't know if we originally, when we read the Mishnah, which was talking about something else, I don't know if we imagined that we were talking about a wooden keli, but I guess the premise, the principle would be the same. So one text, one brisa says you can use a whole keli but not a broken keli. Tanya Idach, another brisa says, just as you're allowed to use a full keli for firewood, kach masikim b'shivri kelim, the same thing would apply to a broken keli. The Tanya Idach, and then there's a third brisa. Ein masikin loy b'kelim v'loy b'shivri kelim. The third brisa says you cannot use any vessel, broken or whole. So we have three different brisas. What is the basis of their machlokes? So let's see. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Nechemiah. So now we're going to have a chance to do a little bit of a crash course to remind ourselves of things that we've learned in the past few days.
By the way, Rabbi, if you remember, originally when we spoke about Kalim, Rashi defined it as any drawers or cabinets or anything like that.
Right.
Those would be made out of wood. I mean, it's also kalim.
Nachon?
So it wouldn't have to be necessarily a bowl or anything like that.
Right. It was just an example. It was an example, but it was an instance, but there are many potential things for Kelim. Correct. Thank you. Now let's see if we can understand this. So 3 brises. One says you can burn everything. One says burn nothing. And one says only burn whole Kelim. Ha, Rabbi Yehuda. Let's read Rashi to help us refresh our memory. Rabbi Yehuda says, Masikin bekelim, ve'ein masikin b'shivri kelim. Rabbi Yehuda is the Rabbi Yehuda we just mentioned, who is of the opinion that you can handle on Yom Tov a full keli, but not a broken keli. The Islay Muksa v'noilad. The Islay Muksa, Rabbi Yehuda believes that there is such a thing as Muksa. V'noilad, and noilad, and kelim lav Muksa nino shvarim noiladinu. So kelim, whole dish vessels are not Muksa. Shvarim noilad ninu, the broken shards are noilad. Therefore, the opinion that says yes, whole kelim, not part kelim, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Ha, Rabbi Shimon. The utterly permissible viewpoint is the viewpoint of Rabbi Shimon. Rashi. Ha, the Tani Masik Mishnayim. Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon. The lace lay muksa, the lace lay noilad. As a generalized position, Rabbi Shimon does not consider muksa, and he also does not view these items as noilad. Ha, the final that says nothing. Rabbi Nechemia. Why? Let's read Rashi. Ha, the Tanya af bekelim masikin. Rabbi Nechemia. Who remembers Rabbi Nechemia? He says, Ein keli nital elalit soirich tashmishi ham yuchidloin. The only reason to carry, to handle, to wield a keli is for the very original purpose. Rabbi Shimon is the anti-functional fixedness. I'm sorry, he is the Mr. Functional Fixedness. He does not believe in any functional flexibility. There's no creativity. A keli, so yeah, he is Mr. Functional Fixedness. You go to the store, the label says this is a hammer for mid-size macadamia nuts. That's it. All you can do is crush mid-size macadamia nuts. We cannot consider any other use. So therefore, on Shabbos, you cannot use that hammer even for another purpose. That's permitted on Shabbos. And obviously, there are probably some other instances as well. He says you can only use the marketed, advertised, labeled use. Again, the Amar Ein Kli Nital El Litzarech Tashmishay. You cannot take a keli except for Tashmishay Hamayuchadlai. It's expressed specific primary use. Now let's think about it. A bowl is used for holding food, mixing food, serving food, maybe even holding liquids. But burning, putting it in the fire, that's nothing like its intended use. V'hai lav miyuchado loy, using it for kindling is very much not its miyuchad. The lav lasakakai, no one buys a bowl or any kind of keli. You don't buy cabinets to throw in the fire. You don't buy a chest to throw in the fire. You buy firewood to throw in the fire. And so now we have 3 beautiful brises, each one disagreeing, but very helpfully portraying the viewpoints of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Yehuda is, well, anyways, okay, so there you have it. This is a wonderful exercise to help review those 3 opinions. Now the Gemara is going to go to a few sub-halachas, specific questions. Amar Rav Nachman. I shouldn't say specific questions, it's really specific halachas. Amar Rav Nachman. This is about functional flexibility. Hani livnei the ishtayir mebinyana. Have a construction site with leftover bricks. Shari, we had this earlier in the Gemara too, I believe. Shari latal tolino. You're allowed to carry them. By the way, you'll notice here that Rashi has a slightly different word, but it means the same thing. And let me just look in the original Surah Sadaf. Yeah, Dishtoyer min binyana. Shehishlim binyanai. He finished his construction. Vinitoiser, and there are leftover bricks. Umehashta, at this moment, like Kaimila binyan, those bricks are no longer building for the building. So what are you going to do with the leftover bricks? If you're keeping them around, you want to use them for something else. Elaleishev alehem v'toiras kli alehem. Now you intend to use them for sitting. Now I'm struggling to imagine desiring bricks for a sitting arrangement, and particularly because I'm imagining those red bricks that you see in a lot of the country, and I don't see how that would be the most comfortable sitting arrangement. But if you're leaving them around and you cannot use them for building, that's what you're going to do. Sharginahu. But if you put it back into the construction type pallet form, then you've re-muksad it to be designated for construction. Rashi sharginhu, isidron zu al zu. But if you started arranging it the way you see a pile of bricks at a construction site, by now it's been set aside for another construction project and not to be used. And so here, what Rav Nachman is teaching us is that there are times that the flexibility or the diversity of uses depend not just on the essential item, but how it is presented. Presentation, or how you manage your stuff, has influence, has bearings on the halacha status. Let's take a peek in the Shulchan Aruch, who quotes this halacha almost word for word. Levenim shenisharu ma'binyan, leftover bricks. Mutal taltalam. Now you can carry them. Deme'ata like kamel binyan elo lemizga. You can use it for mizga, which is lisamech v'leshavas aleim, to sit on them. Imsidram zelzeh kol adatei sheiksa lebinyan v'asol taltalam. So we have here the Shulchan Aruch codifying this very idea to the T. Let's take a fast look here. Why can you sit on them? They become a kli. The kol deroi lemidi, anything that could be used for something. And it's being kept around for that purpose. Toiras kli aleha, it becomes a keli. Usually, we don't look at bricks as a keli. We look at bricks as something that goes into a building, kind of like the fragment of glass that we want to use in an art project. It's not a kli. It's raw material. But being that you've kept these bricks around, it becomes, for the moment, like a kli, explains the Mishnah Berurah, nisarim va'oros, and the same thing would apply to beams of wood or leather that either are or are not muksa, depending on the evidence of what it's going to be used for. And if it's a keli, that's malachton le heter. Then you would be allowed to move it even from in the shade. From the language of the Gemara and the language of the Shulchan Aruch, it sounds like you do not even need a specific machshava, because reality is the greatest evidence of what your intention is. The Mishnah Berurah says there are others that are machmir to say that you should actually have a proactive machshava. And what about broken bricks? So then he says if they break, well, then they're treated like all the laws of shivrei kelim. But if you restacked it, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, now you cannot carry it. You can't use it at all. You can't carry it at all. The leika Torah is kli alein, because now it's totally not a keli. V'dinayu kedin avonim, and these bricks revert to stones, which stones are utterly muksa. They're not a keli, and they are the ideal, ultimate, perfect instance of true muksa. So there we have an instance where the Mishnah Berurah was a wonderful commentary, not just for the halacha, but also for our Gemara, and hopefully the Gemara will reload. Bear with me. I do want to look at one more thing. That was the Shulchan Aruch. Let's just take a fast peek at the Rambam's language. Oh, you see, Machbadei Shal Tomorrow. This is yesterday's Gemara. A broom made out of palms that you used to sweep the floor. Interesting. He says the Rambam seems to be considering the reality today, which is that you don't sweep earth, you sweep tiled finished floors. So therefore, he says a broom is not muksa. The veinim shenisharu min abinyan. What about leftover bricks? Harehim kekli shemalachte leheter. It is like a kli which is permitted for use. So the Rambam here answers my question. The nature of these bricks is to be smooth and fixed and comfortable for sitting, relatively speaking. But if you restack them up, now they're back to the construction site. I can't control myself. Just give me a moment. No.
Rabbi.
Hold on. I just want to show you this. Go ahead.
No, isn't it strange that we use an example of bricks? I mean, I have a picture of a guy schlepping on Shabbos or Yom Tov and bricks are basically for building. So you have also the problem of binyan. I mean, what an example.
Yeah. But again, today the halacha might be different because in reality, I've never seen someone using bricks for sitting. But maybe apparently in those days it was. Now I want to just show you, I asked the question. It's an obvious question. We read the Rambam, and the Rambam says you're allowed to carry a broom because it's a kli shemalachte leheter. Our Gemara yesterday, I don't know if you remember, absolutely explicitly said that a broom for heavy sweeping is kli shemalachte leisser. So probably all the commentaries, but the first one that came up here is the Master Rekeach. He says like this: after the Gemara, daf kuf chav daled. Although our Gemara kuf chav daled, mashma have a kli shemalachte leisser. It's evident that it is a kli that you're not allowed to use on Shabbos, mishum ash vegumois, because it's used for smoothing out the ground. V'sham pirish Rashi dafilo Rabbi Shimon moida mipsik reisha, and in the Rashi actually says that even the most lenient opinion, as it relates to muksa, would say it's not allowed. The custom Rabbeinu shaymoto lechabe b'Shabbos nishma the kavanasai lekarka shehu merutzaf. It's clear that the Rambam is considering the reality of his day, which is that floors are finished, they're tiled, they're carpeted, they're with wooden panels, whatever, and therefore you're allowed to sweep the kan hiter kulon mishum the kivan the biratzav mutar malach leheter krina be. And now the Rambam, considering that most sweeping jobs are done on floor that's not sand. Generally speaking, a broom will be considered a kli shemalachte leheter, but you still shouldn't use it, obviously, on sand. And just so you see, the Maggid Mishnah too says the same thing. Meforish mechadash lamar hein kli malach leisor v'lehilchas ve'idna v'ha'idna the kaimal like Rabbi Shimon. Interesting. He gives a slightly different answer. He just says that Rabbi Shimon would be more lenient, which means that the Maggid Mishnah believes the Rambam is arguing with Rashi. Rashi says that Rabbi Shimon would answer it, but the Maggid Mishnah interprets the Rambam as embracing that opinion. Okay, here he says, although the Rambam is aware of the fact that you shouldn't sweep unfinished floors, being that if the floor is finished, you can sweep. Now they're considered malachlis. So anyways, leheter rather. So you see over here, everyone has that same comment, a little bit off of our primary route, but I wanted to show you that. Now we're going to continue our Gemara. Rav Nachman, another halacha that needs to be considered. Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Cheres Kitana, a small piece of cheres, or earthenware, that is broken. It can be carried within a chatzar. Avaloi bekarmelis, but not in a karmelis. Karmelis like Rashi, the chatzar, the shchichi ba kelim, because there are a lot of kelim there. Shacheres hazaroi lahem lekisoi, and so this shard has a lot of uses in the present moment, because it is surrounded by potential vessels that need to be covered with teres kli olav, and so it's considered a kelim. But not in a karmelis, afilu b'toich dal ramis, but in a public-ish, in a communally accessible space, you cannot carry it. Why? People don't leave their privately owned kelim in a public space, and therefore there is no use. So why would you be carrying it? This is what Shmuel taught. Rav Nachman conveyed in the name of Shmuel. Rav Nachman disagrees with Shmuel and says, "Afilu b'karmelis, that could be carried in a karmelis." Why? Rashi says, being that it is still not really a public domain, even though it is publicly accessible. So shchichi da ozli v'yasvi hasam because people all go around there, and you can use it to cover up spit or other uses. So he says people are more at home. It's more of a slow-paced space, and you have a use.
Rabbi,
hold on one second. But in Rishus Harabim it becomes muksa. Kiva the Bechatzar Klihu. I'm sorry, but Rava disagrees and says Afilu Rishus Harabim. Once it's not muksa, it can be carried and handled anywhere. Rashi explains Kiva the Bechatzar Klihu, but Alma Nami Le Pakashem Klimine. It never loses its title as a kli, and so even where it can't immediately be used, it's a kli that's not muksa. Rebel.
Why wouldn't they make the argument more directly that you could carry a shard if you have a use for it? What do I care whether it's in there or a Carmelite or whatever?
So
you can one day find a Carmelite with more kalim than in the middle. It changes all the time.
So you're asking, instead of stratifying the halacha based on zone, just talk about need.
Right.
That's a good question. Well, Rava makes that case. Rava makes your case. Shmuel says, listen, it's like semi non-muksa. A broken shard is might be garbage and might be useful. When is it garbage? When it has no immediate use. So if you're walking around in a public domain, it breaks. What do you do with it? You just leave it. Now, obviously, we have an interesting question to ask, which is, forget tiltal. What's going on? Are you allowed to carry in Rishus Harabim? Since when are you allowed to carry something in Rishus Harabim? So first of all, let me ask a question. Can you carry in a Rishus Harabim?
Eruv? No Eruv?
No, if there's an Eruv, it's not a, well, maybe. Rebel, maybe the reasoning here has nothing to do with tiltal. Maybe it has to do with, so maybe an Eruv would not make a place, not really Rishus Harabim. Maybe. But can we come up with any other explanations? How much tiltal can you do in a Rishus Harabim? So under Dalet Amis, you're allowed to technically handle or carry something. You can't carry Dalet Amis per Rishus Harabim. So maybe we're talking about less than a Rishus Harabim. Let me see if I can find you anything else.
You can carry less than Alba Amos, put it down, pick it up and carry another.
Yeah, technically. Hold on.
We're going to end up in a situation where you're better off to break the keli and then you could carry the pieces.
I'm not sure about that, but that is an interesting point.
There is mere.
And the Rambam Paskins like Rava. Cheres kitana mutal taltala afilu b'Rishus Harabim. A small piece of broken earthenware you can carry even Rishus Harabim. Hoyel reuyahu b'chatzer. L'chasas b'pi kli katan. because once it loses its status, once it is a keli, it's a keli. The Shulchan Aruch. Oh. Anyway, it says the same thing. So we pass like Rava.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Obviously, I'm troubled by this construction site. What about other materials that are not bricks that a guy could sit on? He could
Is the
carry?
construction site finished doing the construction and they're still keeping it around?
You know,
If the construction site is done and they're still keeping it around and it's not organized to be delivered to the next construction site, presumably we would use the same principle so long as it had a reasonable use. Presumably. So there is that. Interestingly enough, Tosfos tells us that Rava, although lenient in regards to this piece of cheres, is actually quite machmir in consideration of making something muksa and noila dan yontif. And so Tosfos makes the point that this cheres would have had to have become a cheres before Shabbos, not on Shabbos. Rashi, v'hani the nishbru be'erev Shabbos kamar. It's got to be that it broke on erev Shabbos. The nishbru be'Shabbos, Rava would say it's muksa and you cannot handle it. So that's an important caveat. So here we have another halacha.
Rabbi, one more point, please. So if we have the situation where somebody moves 2-3 bricks and he sits on them for 15 minutes. What could he do with them after?
It's not if he sits on them, it's that he could sit on them.
Right. So he sits on them for 5-10 minutes, and then what happens to those
explain
bricks
to you,
after?
I think what Rashi said, being that these are now sitting bricks, they're a kli. The kli is sitting bricks. A kli shemalachta leheter, something that its use is primarily permissible. I will put that primarily with a question mark because maybe not. Something that it's considered a kli shemalachta leheter. What happens if there is sun or a hurricane watch and you need to move it into the shed? Is it muksa? Or rather, are you allowed to carry it? L'tzoirech.
No, I was thinking of something else. After he sits on that, can he use that brick for a door to keep it open or whatever we have?
Yeah. Any permissible use you could use. But the chiddush is not just that. Well, actually, I'll take that back. The chiddush is that this brick is considered a kli. Because bricks in their natural habitat, bricks, when they are part of a construction site, are total muksa. They're not kalim, they're avonim. They're raw material. Right. And raw material is utterly muksa. But now that it's no longer part of a construction site, it becomes not only a kli, it becomes a kli shemalachta leheter, and you have the ultimate number of permitted uses. And even if you're not using it, but you just need to move it out of inclement weather, you can move it as well. Whereas a construction site, on Shabbos, you would not be allowed to move the raw materials because of sun or any other kind of weather or other jeopardy to the item. Well, short of pikuach nefesh. So if there's anyways, okay. The Azza Rabba Litame. Rabba is consistent with his shita. What is his shita? Let's see the Gemara. The Rabba Abakazil Beriska Dem Choza. Rabba was once walking in the Ritka, which is the public market, let's say, or something to that effect. I believe that's what we're gonna have to call it. Let's see if our resources here give us. Yeah, the marketplace of Mechuzah. He was in the marketplace of Mechuzah. Itavas Masane Tina. Nislach lech min alay betit. His shoes became muddy. Asa Shamei, his shamish, his assistant came. Shikal chaspa v'komechaperle. The attendant, the servant, took a shard of glass of cheres, and he wiped off the mud from his shoe. Ramu Be'Ravak Rabbanan Kala, the rabbis were in an uproar. Rabbis know how to do that. Omar, so Rava said, is it enough that you didn't learn? You're going to try to teach your ignorance to others? This is one of those lines that we should put on a bumper sticker. Rashi, it's not enough that you don't know the halachas of Shabbos. You don't know what's allowed and what's not allowed. You're promulgating, you're promoting your ignorance. Had I been in a chotzer, couldn't I have used this as a cover for a keli? And therefore the kli remains available for alternate permitted uses. Rashi likinuach. It's considered a kli, and it doesn't lose its title of a kli just because it's no longer in a chotzer, it's in a reshus harabim.
Rabbi, isn't there a bigger shaila that the guy's working to clean his shoes?
Well, it's not about working, it's if it's a malacha. So what malacha would you imagine would be in cleaning his shoes? You're asking a good question. I just want to hear what you're thinking.
No. First of all, you're improving something. You have the category of improving.
Improving?
On Shabbos.
Are you allowed to wash your hands on Shabbos?
Yes.
Improving, are you allowed to? So I'm thinking,
But
this is not considered
you
laundering.
can't
These
wash
are
your clothes on Shabbos.
You shouldn't
sorry?
be working altogether. The
You're
servant.
not allowed to launder clothes, but apparently removing some schmutz from your shoe might not be considered a malacha. But what I was expecting someone to say, and I'm not sure the answer.
I think maybe the clue is that it says the servant came, not that he told him to do it.
That's interesting, but I don't think so. My question is sometimes, hold on. It's 11 o'clock already. Wow. I guess we'll pick up over here tomorrow. My question is the act of smearing, of spreading and scraping off the mud from a shoe, is there a possible malacha? My gut says there are some other issues we need to consider, but we'll have to visit it tomorrow. So for now, my dear friends, wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us. And forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Be'ezer Hashem, Gesund Heit, Freilich Heit. And Yasher Koyach.
Yasher Koyach, thank you. Thank you.